The video message from my daughter-in-law, Lena, landed like a slap to the face. There she was on the screen, perfectly made up, her blonde hair cascading over designer clothing, a fake smile plastered on her lips. "Hi, Marlene, Theo," she began in that sickly sweet tone. "I'm reaching out about Aiden's 5th birthday bash next month. It's a major milestone, so we want to make it extra special." Here it comes, I thought, exchanging a wary glance with Theo. Ever since Elliot married this Instagram beauty queen, her demands on us had only grown. "A little birdie told me you two were looking to get Aiden something amazing for his big day." Lena batted her fake eyelashes. "Well, I'm making it easy. Aiden would absolutely love a brand new swimming pool installed in our backyard." My jaw dropped. A pool? Those ran tens of thousands of dollars, even for a basic model. Nothing too fancy. Lena continued with a dismissive hair toss. "Just your standard issue resort-style in-ground pool with a pool house, hot tub, the whole 9 yards. You know how much Aiden loves swimming." She droned on with more details of her extravagant vision, but I'd stopped listening. This was absurd. After years of her entitled behavior, this felt like the final straw. "So let me know if you need any other details. But really, make it worthwhile or don't even bother showing up." Lena flashed one last grin before the video cut out. The silence hung heavy between Theo and me. "She can't be serious," I finally sputtered. Theo sighed, squeezing the bridge of his nose. "When is she not?" You know how Lena gets. I did know. Ever since Elliot brought this artificially sweet high-maintenance woman into our lives, she'd made increasingly outrageous demands under the guise of making memories for our grandson Aiden. Expensive Disney cruises, designer clothes, even a celebrity kiddie party planner for his 4th birthday bash. And Lena always spun it as being for Aiden, but anyone could see the real priority was herself and her influencer image. But this took things to another level. A fully decked-out pool just for a kid's birthday? It was obscene. "We can't," I said flatly. "Theo, we don't have that kind of money. Even if we scraped everything we had, there's no way." Tears pricked my eyes, a mix of anger, hurt, and exasperation churning inside me. This was our family she was talking about, not one of her online audiences to impress. I could see the same emotions etched on Theo's face as he pulled me into a hug. For a long moment, we clung to each other, united against Lena's audacious demand. But Theo eventually pulled back, resignation in his eyes. Maybe we could look into something smaller," he said tentatively. "We both have been putting in extra hours at work, and there's my pension fund that'll be available soon." I stared at him, stunned he'd even entertained such lunacy. "You're not seriously considering this?" He shrugged helplessly. "It's for our grandson, Marlene. If doing this might help get Lena off our backs, keep Elliot and Aiden in our lives." His words trailed off, but I could hear the unspoken meaning loud and clear. If giving Lena what she demanded was the price for preserving our family, for keeping Elliot and Aiden from being completely poisoned by her distorted values. Reopening the wound she just inflicted, Lena's parting words echoed in my mind. "Make it worthwhile, or don't bother showing up." My heart ached at the thought of being cut off from my only grandchild over this, but I also couldn't fathom bankrupting ourselves for one of Lena's tantrums. Squaring my shoulders, I met Theo's worried gaze. No matter what it took, I wouldn't let this woman fracture our family. We had to find a way to make this right. The days blurred together after that bombshell from Lena. Every conversation, every interaction seemed to circle back to her outrageous pool demand. "We could put a home equity loan on the house," Theo mused one night over dinner, "just to cover the upfront costs." I nearly choked on my food. "Are you insane? Go into debt over this? We're not made of money." He wilted under my glare. "I'm just trying to think of options, honey. You know how Lena gets when she doesn't get her way." I slammed my fork down with more force than intended. "So what? We just roll over for her every tantrum? Where does it end?" The haunted look in Theo's eyes said it all. We both knew there was no endpoint with Lena, not unless one of us put our foot down. Still, the threat of being cut off from Elliot and Aiden loomed over us like a curse. In a way, that's exactly what Lena had become, a curse upon our family. The demands only escalated from there. Suddenly she was calling constantly, texting incessant updates about party planning she needed our input on. Her reasoning didn't even make sense half the time. She just wanted to soak up our energy and resources. One afternoon, I arrived home from the library to find Theo elbow-deep in sketches and spreadsheets. "What's all this?" I asked in bewilderment. "Lena stopped by with one of her vision boards," he sighed, looking 20 years older. "She had it all mapped out, the pool, the landscaping, even a pool house with its own kitchen and bar." "You're kidding." I sank onto the couch, anger roiling in my gut. "She brought this insanity into our home?" "She said this is the only way Aiden will be happy." Theo raked a hand through his thinning hair warily. "That we're depriving him if we don't make his dream come true." My jaw clenched hard enough to crack teeth. "That's a bunch of crap. This is about her, not Aiden." I know. Theo turned back to the coffee table of binders and portfolios, misery etched in the slump of his shoulders. "But maybe if we put in some reasonable requests, she'll settle for less. Or maybe she'll keep demanding more." I threw up my hands in frustration. Since when did we start going broke for that woman's ego? The shrill ring of Theo's phone cut off his reply. Lena's smiling face flashing on the screen. He shot me an apologetic look and answered, jaw tensing as she launched into another tirade. I watched him nod along like a beaten dog, offering feeble uh-huhs and "we'll sees" in response to her endless stream of wants. When he finally hung up 20 minutes later, I could no longer hold back my fury. "I'm drawing the line, Theo. This is utter madness." Sagging back against the sofa, he looked utterly defeated. "She threatened not to let us see Aiden if we don't give in, Marlene. What are we supposed to do?" My heart twisted at the mere thought of losing our grandson, of Aiden being shaped and twisted by that woman's distorted values, without our stabilizing presence to guide him. It was a waking nightmare. But I also knew we couldn't keep indulging Lena's deranged spending and entitlement complex. It was a vicious, self-perpetuating cycle. Someone had to put their foot down, even if it meant confronting the worst possible outcome. Meeting Theo's haunted gaze, I drew a steadying breath. We need a plan. One that finally puts this madness to bed, without losing our family over it. His eyes widened briefly, then narrowed to cold steel. At last, we were on the same page. No more being manipulated, no more cowering to Lena's histrionics. For the sake of our grandchild, the kid glove treatment was officially over. Aiden's 5th birthday party was every bit the overblown spectacle Lena had threatened. Dozens of shrieking kids swarmed the backyard she'd decked out like a carnival midway. Balloon arches, a massive bounce house, even a live petting zoo dominated our modest suburban yard. "Can you believe this madness?" I muttered to Theo as we wove through the chaos, searching for our grandson. He grimaced, eyes bouncing from the whirring rides to the team of princessed-up party performers putting on a show. "Try not to let it get to you today. We're here for Aiden, remember?" Easy for him to say. My teeth ground with each new display of excess I took in. An entire hide worth of party food piled onto tables, an electric train ride blaring its caller through the neighborhood. All for one little boy's birthday. But Lena was the true ringmaster of this 3-ring circus. She flitted through the crowd in a designer sundress that cost more than my monthly mortgage, greeting guests with air kisses and fake laughs. Her social media friend posed beside her for countless staged photo ops. When she finally deigned to notice us, her sugary smile didn't reach her eyes. "Well, if it isn't the party poopers, so glad you two could join." I opened my mouth, every biting remark I'd rehearsed rising to my tongue. But Theo squeezed my hand in warning. "We're happy to be here for Aiden's big day," he replied tightly. Yes, about that." Lena's eyes flicked across the yard, sweeping dismissively over the chaos surrounding us. "I must admit, I'm a little disappointed. I thought you two loved your grandson enough to go all out." I bristled at her condescending tone, taking in the insanity all around us. "You're kidding me, right? This spectacle is enough for 10 birthdays. Oh, honey, don't be so bourgeois." She patted my cheek in a way that made me want to slap it. "You know that's just how us influencers do things. Go big or go home, right?" The fake, tinkling laugh that followed made my blood boil. Bourgeois? She was the one blowing enough cash for a down payment on a house on this ridiculous circus. "Where's the gift, anyway?" She tapped one designer heel impatiently. "I gave you too ample time to make this a memorable bash for Aiden." "The gift?" Theo sputtered, shifting uncomfortably. We didn't get the chance to really. Don't tell me you punted on that too. Lena's face contorted into a sneer, drawing looks from nearby guests. See, this is exactly why I keep my expectations low for you two. So painfully pedestrian. That was the final straw. I jabbed a finger at the spectacle surrounding us, fury making me tremble. Are you out of your mind? Look at all this. How could you possibly need or want anything more? Ooh, someone's getting a little big for her britches. Lena ran her eyes over me with barely disguised contempt. I expected better than this pathetic display from my husband's parents. Truly disappointing. As her social circle began murmuring and leaning in, I saw red. The only disappointment here is you, using Aiden as an excuse to bankrupt us over this gaudy. Mommy? The small, timid voice caused the breath to catch in my throat. I turned to find Aiden himself standing there, party hat askew and confusion written on his cherubic features. What's going on? His wide eyes bounced between Lena and me. For a long, tense beat, the entire party seemed to hold its collective breath, waiting for Lena's response. Then her features melted into an exaggerated pout, and she rushed to pull Aiden against her hip. Oh, sweetie, your mean old grandma's just upset she couldn't get you that new pool you wanted. Pool? The poor kid looked even more bewildered. Yes, for your birthday. Tears welled in Lena's eyes as she stroked his hair. But she and Grandpa are just being selfish old grumps about giving you your present. Aiden's gaze bounced between Lena and us, innocent incomprehension melting into dismay. The sight twisted my heart into knots. Lena, as always, had spun a web of lies to paint herself as the hapless victim. But I didn't want a pool, Aiden mumbled meekly. A hush fell over the entire yard as every eye turned toward Lena, awaiting her response. Her jaw tightened for a fraction of a second before she threw an arm around Aiden, sobbing dramatically. Of course you didn't, sweetie. She locked eyes with me over his head, that vindictive smile back in place. How could you want something so frivolous when you have such a thoughtful mom who's about to give you a baby sibling? My heart plummeted somewhere into my shoes. As a new flood of cries and gasps filled the yard, surrounding us in a swell of shock, Lena just stared at me in cold triumph. In that moment, I knew nothing would ever be the same. The fallout from Aiden's disastrous birthday bash was swift and absolute. In the days and weeks after Lena's conniving pregnancy reveal, a palpable rift formed in our family. Elliot, ever the doting husband, rallied behind his devious wife without question. She's under a lot of stress and hormones right now, he protested whenever Theo or I tried reasoning with him. We need to be supportive. Supportive? After the humiliating spectacle she made of us in front of all those people, over her ludicrous lies about wanting a pool for Aiden, the mere thought made my blood boil. But Elliot simply waved off our concerns, too besotted to see Lena's true colors. Instead, the two of them retreated further into their social media bubble, posting a deluge of videos and photo ops about her radiant pregnancy journey. Meanwhile, our access to our actual grandson continued dwindling at Lena's behest. Every attempt at a visit or outing was rebuffed with another flimsy excuse about her difficult pregnancy and need for rest. I tried pushing back, calling Elliot out on our unfair treatment, but he only grew more defensive. Why can't you be happy for us? He snapped during one tense exchange after I insisted on having Aiden over for Theo's birthday. I threw up my hands in disgust. Of course we're happy you're having another child, but this goes far beyond that, and you know it. Elliot's jaw tightened mulishly. No, I don't know that. All I see are my parents acting jealous and bitter about our growing family. The hurtful accusation struck deep, rendering me momentarily speechless. How could my own son be so blind to the manipulation swirling around him? I stalked off before I said something I'd regret, fighting back angry tears. In the den, I found Theo watching the latest Lena video with a pained expression. Did you see this garbage? I scoffed, gesturing at the screen where Lena cooed about her pregnancy glow and upcoming nursery design. She's airing all our dirty laundry for clicks. Theo shook his head slowly. Not just that. Check out the comments. A quick skim revealed a distressing number of replies bashing us, calling us cruel and unsupportive, all based on the twisted story Lena was peddling about her humble family. Clicking off the video in disgust, I sank into the sofa beside Theo. I don't know how much more of this I can take. He draped a comforting arm around my shoulders, the wariness in his eyes mirroring my own. We knew there'd be backlash for standing up to Lena. She's not going to let this slide. So we're just supposed to sit back while she smears us in public? Cuts us off from our own grandchild over her petty schemes? Tears of frustration stung my eyes. Of course not, but we need to be smart about our next move. As if on cue, Theo's phone chimed with a new text notification. Something in his expression shifted as he read the message. "What is it?" I asked warily. He held the phone out, letting me read the message from an unknown number. "Evidence against Lena. Seeing you suffer kills me, but I can help. Attached are files on her real spending priorities. No need to thank me. I'll remain anonymous. Do what you must." My breath caught as I scrolled through the suspicious attachments. Bank statements detailing massive sums of money, photographs appearing to show Lena out partying and gallivanting while Aiden was off-screen. Could this be legitimate? "Who's this from?" I asked in a hushed voice, dread and a sliver of hope warring within me. Theo shook his head, lips set in a grim line. "No idea. But whoever they are, they just handed us the key to bringing Lena down once and for all." My heart stuttered at the thought, at finally being able to strike back at her manipulative lies and power plays, to save Aiden from her toxic influence. But to do so could risk severing our family ties for good. Elliot would surely take Lena's side, blinded by her false narratives. Theo must have seen the turmoil playing out on my face, because he squeezed my hand fiercely, leaning until our eyes met. "This may be our only chance, Marlene, our best shot at getting Aiden away from her poisonous influence, by any means necessary." The words hung heavy in the air, their implication clear. This was it, our point of no return that would alter the course of our family forever. No matter how it played out in the aftermath, we couldn't back down from this make-or-break moment, not if it meant protecting Aiden's future. With a shuddering exhale, I nodded to Theo. Time to stop walking on eggshells around Lena once and for all. Time to fight back. After the damning evidence from our anonymous source, Theo and I wasted no time springing into action against Lena. We began compiling every scrap of proof we could find, racking our brains for past incidents and manipulations she'd pulled over the years. With my background as a librarian, I focused on conducting meticulous online research, while Theo tapped his network of colleagues and parents at the high school for any whispers about Lena's unscrupulous behavior. No stone was left unturned in our quest to expose her web of lies. "Did you know the Hensons cut ties with Lena after their son's birthday party last year?" Theo told me one evening over coffee, eyes bright with vindication. I raised my eyebrows. "No, I didn't. What happened?" "Apparently she hosted this overblown princess bash for their daughter, then badmouthed them on social media for being cheap with their gift." Theo shook his head in disgust. "Jane said Lena has an entire hate folder on her phone, with screenshots of messages going back months." My blood boiled at the thought of more innocent families being dragged through the mud by that wretched snake. "I want copies of everything. We're blowing this whole farce wide open." Theo nodded grimly, determination etched into every line of his weathered face. For too long, we'd suffered in silence, taking Lena's abuse in misguided hopes of protecting our family. But now, armed with the truth and a growing arsenal of evidence, we were going to make her pay for her manipulation, one way or another. And I refused to let Aiden remain trapped in her toxic orbit any longer. The plan took shape over hushed discussions at our kitchen table, fueled by righteous indignation and the occasional glass of wine to steady our nerves. After raising our finances on tight budgets for so long, even the idea of striking back at Lena carried immense risk. But seeing the despicable way she'd used and discarded other families for her own gratification, her callous treatment of Aiden, it all hardened our resolve. This was about more than just settling a personal vendetta. "What if we started an anonymous website?" I proposed one night, tapping my pencil restlessly against my notepad. "A landing spot to release all the evidence to the public without directly confronting her." Theo frowned, rubbing his chin. "Isn't that a bit passive, though? You know Lena, she'll just spin it as more hater attacks and bury the truth with her own propaganda blitz." "Maybe?" I worried my lip, then my eyes drifted to the teetering pile of manila folders brimming with damning documents. Or maybe we go straight to the source. He lifted one bushy eyebrow. You want to slip this all to Elliot? I shrugged, nerves fluttering in my belly. It's a risk, sure, but at this point, a direct intervention might be our only hope of finally breaking through to him and the truth. The thought of turning our own son against his wife, no matter how vile she'd proven to be, made my stomach churn. But I couldn't shake the memory of his haunted, oblivious expression at Aiden's party as Lena spun her web, too blinded by her manipulation to see the toxic reality. Releasing all our gathered evidence in one fell swoop, overwhelming him with proof of her true nature. It could be the wake-up call Elliot so desperately needed to escape her grasp. Theo sighed heavily, reaching across to squeeze my hand. It's a bold move, and if Elliot warns Lena first, then all bets are off, I finished quietly. We both knew that in Lena's hands the documents spelling out her misdeeds could vanish like smoke, smothered by her relentless spin and lies. Not to mention any fallout or vindictive vengeance she'd gleefully unleash on us all. But what other choice did we have? Sitting idly by had allowed her toxic web to spread unchecked this far. If we wanted any hope of saving Aiden from that poisonous environment, of protecting the rest of our family from her malice, we had to take one final, daring swing at the heart of her vile empire. Meeting Theo's steadfast gaze across the table, I saw the same conviction burning behind his eyes. No matter the risk, we couldn't let this insanity drag on any longer. Not while an innocent child's future hung in the balance. After all, that's what family was for, shielding our loved ones from those who wished to do them harm. And God help anyone who threatened a single hair on Aiden's head. With a grim nod, I reached for another file, and the planning began anew. One way or another, we'd bring Lena's house of lies crashing down around her, even if it meant raising our own family to the studs in the process. It was time. After weeks of meticulous planning and gathering evidence, Theo and I were ready to execute our gambit against Lena. The night before, we'd uploaded a comprehensive file dump to an anonymous web server, a digital dossier containing every scrap of proof we'd uncovered about Lena's neglect, manipulation, and wasteful spending. Incriminating bank statements, logged social media activity, even testimonies from others she'd mistreated over the years. All of it packaged together in one tidy bundle, waiting for our final keystrokes to release it upon the world. We planned to send the upload link directly to Elliot first, hoping the shock of the revelations would finally break whatever spell Lena had him under. But we also arranged for the files to automatically broadcast across multiple social platforms an hour later, ensuring widespread dispersal no matter how Lena tried to bury it. As the appointed hour ticked closer, my stomach twisted with nervous dread. This was it, our chance to protect Aiden and blow Lena's sham life apart for good. But the implications for the rest of our family... You ready for this? Theo's gruff voice pulled me from my whirling thoughts. He reached across the table to grasp my clammy hand, his own slightly trembling. We both knew there was no going back after this. I could only manage a tight nod, drawing a steadying breath. As I'll ever be. Theo's eyes crinkled at the corners with grim resignation, then he turned toward the laptop between us. My heart kicked into overdrive as his finger hovered over the trackpad. For Aiden, he murmured. Our personal code for stealing our nerves these past few weeks. Another nod from me. For Aiden. And with that, he struck the upload key. Lena's exposure officially began. The file pinged to Elliot's inbox first, accompanied by a brief message. Open me, and you'll finally see the truth about your wife. I felt sick watching the progress bar crawl as the massive data dump transferred over. Every second dragged out like a Russian novel, each percentage increase seeming to taunt us with the damage we were about to unleash. How would Elliot react to this bombshell revelation about the woman he'd married? Would he immediately dismiss it as our bitter meddling? Or would the sheer enormity of evidence finally pierce whatever veil Lena had draped over his eyes? Most importantly, how vicious would Lena's retaliation be once she caught wind of our actions? A part of me was tempted to call the whole thing off, to snatch back this Pandora's box before its contents could contaminate our lives forever. But another insistent part, the one blazing with righteous fury over Lena's cruelty to Aiden, knew we'd finally crossed the Rubicon. There could be no half measures or surrender now, only scorched earth in the wake of our campaign. Suddenly, an alert box startled me from my daze. Transfer complete. The uploaded documents began ricocheting around the internet a second later, a widening digital diaspora every bit as uncontrollable as a raging bushfire. Within that first minute, a video compilation of Lena's greatest con hits began autoplaying on her own Instagram page, overlaying her palatial home videos with audio snippets of her vicious comments about Aiden and our family. Her comment sections, Twitter feeds, every social platform began melting down with a similar deluge of shocking evidence. Bank statements laid bare, archived posts and videos of her neglecting Aiden while living it up, personal messages mapping the intricate deceptions she'd spun. The bombardment was overwhelming, a digital tsunami crashing hard against the carefully curated facade she'd constructed over the years. And that was just the opening salvo in our counterstrike. Beside me, Theo let out a shuddering breath, half tension blowing off, half dawning realization of what we'd just set into motion. We watched the rapidly proliferating files ricochet across the web and across our community like a firestorm, the enormity of our actions finally striking home. Within the hour, news stations would pick up the story, then the national outlets and celebrity bloggers. And at the center would be our ground zero blast, a stark glimpse into the trauma and manipulation Lena had inflicted upon our family over these past years. It was finally too late to stop the shockwave. Our truth offensive had come for the house of Lena, and nothing would be left unscathed in its wake, not even our own family. The fallout from our cyber bombardment against Lena hit like a hurricane. Within hours, her immaculate online kingdom had been reduced to a smoking crater of shattered illusions and exposed lies. Social media ran rampant with screenshots, videos, and a gleeful dissection of every incriminating scrap of evidence we'd uncovered. Overnight, Lena went from influencer icon to radioactive pariah as her brands and sponsors began jumping ship in droves. As for me and Theo, we could only watch in a strange detachment as the firestorm raged, alternating between grim satisfaction and creeping dread over what this metamorphosis would mean for our family. We hadn't heard a peep from Elliot since uploading the files, leaving us to theorize in anxious silence over how deeply the revelations about his wife had shaken him. Would he emerge from the wreckage still defiantly loyal to Lena's lies? Or had our brutal truth offensive finally broken her spell over him? The answer came just after dawn, in a flurry of tense knocks at the door. Thank God. Theo exhaled in a ragged whisper when we saw Elliot's haggard face through the peephole. He ushered him inside, shooting me a worried glance. Son, what's going on? We've been sick with... The words died on his lips as Elliot staggered forward, eyes hollow and brimming with barely contained rage. I flinched, half expecting him to lash out at the source of this cataclysm. But then, with an anguished cry, he simply crumpled against Theo, shaking with suppressed sobs. Exchanging a wordless look with Theo, I moved to steady Elliot as he began to keen in harsh, gulping gasps, like a dam finally shattering deep within. I'm sorry, he choked between ragged breaths. God, I'm so sorry. My throat thickened at the sheer brokenness lacing his voice. After so many months of self-inflicted isolation at Lena's whim, seeing my own son return to us in such a state felt like a shard of ice piercing my heart. Eventually his sobs tapered enough for speech. You were right about her. All this time you were right. Every vile thing she did to you, to Aiden. Another wave of anguish racked him, and he squeezed his eyes shut, burying his face in Theo's shoulder like a lost child. I exchanged a haunted look with my husband, words unspoken between us. We'd shattered her deceptions, yes, but at what cost to our son? Those messages, the videos. I can't believe I let it go on for so long. How I could be so blind. Hey, it's okay, Theo murmured gruffly, hands rubbing soothing circles on Elliot's back. That's what she did, son. Manipulated you into her web, we get it. The harrowed look in his eyes said otherwise, that some part of us would never forgive ourselves for failing to extract Elliot sooner. But for now, simply cradling our child against the aftermath seemed more important. When his ragged breathing finally evened out, Elliot pulled back, eyes rimmed and face haggard. I kicked her out last night, took Aiden and left after seeing everything. He gestured vaguely, then seemed to deflate all over again. God, how could I let Hervis get so twisted? To put Aiden through all that? I bit back a scathing remark about putting a stop to her antics sooner. My anger could keep for another day. Right now, my son needed comfort and a safe harbor to process this traumatic reckoning, so I simply held his gaze and nodded, hoping he could read the understanding there, and the promise that her reign of terror was over. Elliot's shoulders slumped, weariness crashing over him as the last vestiges of life before crumbled away. Leaning into Theo again, he squeezed his eyes shut. I don't know what I'd do without you both. After everything she put us through? The raw gratitude in his gravelly murmur was like a balm against all the suffering we'd endured this past year. Not that the road ahead would be easy. Lena would surely retaliate against this devastation in whatever ways she could. But in that moment, with our family united against her at long last, I felt a surge of defiance toward whatever vindictive storm still loomed ahead. She'd struck the first blows, set the rules of this scorched earth campaign. Now it was her turn to reap the whirlwind we'd sown. My eyes met Theo's over Elliot's bowed head. A silent vow passed between us, to ensure Lena never regained a foothold in our lives again. Not after this razing to the bedrock. Aiden's future and our family's well-being would remain secure, no matter how much we had to sacrifice to keep the she-wolf away. In the aftermath of our brutal takedown, the shockwaves rippled through every facet of our lives. But for the first time in what felt like an eternity, there was a sense of hope threaded through the upheaval. With Lena banished from our household, Elliot and Aiden took up semi-permanent residence in our spare bedroom as they worked to rebuild their lives from the wreckage she'd left behind. Watching my grandson set Phi into a routine free from her toxic influence was like a soothing balm after so much turmoil. Of course, Lena didn't slink off into oblivion quietly. Her initial defiance at the revelations morphed into a spiraling crusade of denials, threats, and attempts to regain control of the narrative. She's claiming we fabricated everything, Elliot told us one night at the dinner table, jaw clenched in barely contained fury. There's a new video saying we conspired against our own family out of jealousy. Theo grunted in disgust while I fought the urge to hurl my plate across the room. Even disgraced and dejected, that vile woman couldn't help lashing out like a cornered viper. Let her squirm, I spat, locking eyes with my son. The truth is finally out there, loud and clear for anyone who matters to see. You're right. Some of the tension drained from Elliot's shoulders with an exhausted slump. In that moment, he seemed to age years in a matter of seconds. Hell, it's all I can do not to put even more of her dirty laundry on blast right now. Despite the anger still simmering under his words, just having him back under our roof was like a weight lifted. Being able to see Aiden grow and play outside Lena's malign influence made every hardship worthwhile. Sure, she continued sniping and lobbing hateful allegations from her dwindling circle of sycophants. But without her manicured illusions to prop it up, the bluster rang increasingly hollow. While our family unit steadily regained its bearings and sense of purpose, the recharged bonds between Theo, me, and our boys were a constant through the transition. But nowhere was that bond more evident than in our renewed focus on Aiden's well-being. Having him around constantly, free from Lena's manipulation, revealed just how much she'd warped the sweet, innocent boy in her quest for notoriety. "Grandma, why didn't you like my party last time?" he asked me one sunny afternoon while blowing bubbles on the back patio. My gut twisted at the remembered humiliation, but when I glanced over at Aiden's cherubic features, so full of pure childhood curiosity, the truth came easily. "You know something, sweetheart? That whole big party, it wasn't really for you at all." I tickled his belly, earning a peal of giggles. "Your mommy just wanted to show off for her friends, not make you feel special." Aiden's tiny brow furrowed in confusion. "But I thought we were posed to have fun?" Leave it to the heartbreakingly earnest perspective of a child to cut straight through to the core truth. Smiling, I pulled him onto my lap and nuzzled his soft hair. "Of course we are, my little guy. And this time, I promise it's just going to be about us having fun together. No big fuss or showing off, okay?" My throat thickened as I drank in his radiant smile. "Because you're all the fun this old grandma needs." When his arms tightened around me in a fierce hug, I shot a look toward the patio door. Elliot and Theo were watching the tender scene, fondness and relief written across their faces. In that moment, with my family whole again and Lena's toxic presence banished, I felt as light and carefree as the bubbles drifting on the breeze, like awakening from a long, twisted nightmare finally behind us. Our war against Lena's malice had been brutal, with casualties strewn across both sides. But as I held my grandson close, savoring his unbridled joy, the battleground seemed a small price to pay. When Aiden's next milestone birthday arrived a few months later, we threw a small but rowdy bash in the backyard, a jumble of balloons, cheap pizza, and delighted shrieks as he tore through stack after stack of gifts showered on him by his adoring clan. No obscene overindulgences or camera crews, no vapid social media performances. Just the unconditional warmth and love of an extended family reveling in our reconnection. As I watched Theo gamely endure another round of the mechanized dancing robot Aiden had cajoled him into, my heart swelled with a sense of gratitude. For persevering through the darkest days and emerging victorious. For regaining the family I'd feared was lost forever to Lena's poisoned webs. Most of all, for ensuring my sweet grandson's bright future would remain unshackled by that vile woman's lust for attention at any cost. When Aiden came barreling over to demand another turn on the robot, Theo shot me a wink and an exaggerated grimace over the boy's head. A silent acknowledgement of how far we'd come to reclaim these simple family moments. Pulling them both close, I couldn't hide my radiant smile as the sounds of laughter and revelry swirled around us. Our family's new beginning had finally arrived.
Since our marriage, my husband, who has always been attached to his mother, has never contributed to the upkeep of our home. His reliance on me became evident when I informed him of an upcoming business trip. Panicked, he exclaimed, "Who will look after me while you're away?" After a heated discussion, I proceeded with my week-long journey. Upon my return, I discovered a note next to the completed divorce documents, which read, "Since you've abandoned the housework, I'm going back to my parents. Consider the divorce papers and think it over." This infuriated me. His audacity to threaten divorce was unacceptable. However, as I calmed down, I began to see this as a potential opportunity. Perhaps a divorce wasn't such a bad idea after all. Resolute, I submitted the papers the following day. The next morning, my bewildered husband stormed in, demanding, "Where are the divorce papers?" When I told him they had been filed, he broke down, utterly perplexed and crying uncontrollably. I'm Grace, 32 years old, and have been married for just over a year. After completing my studies, I diligently climbed the corporate ladder at a prominent company. Amidst the hustle of my work at the agency, I met Edward, a softly spoken man a few years younger than me. We soon connected over several outings, and his respectful and understanding demeanor during our courtship led me to believe he could be the one. When he eventually proposed, I was overjoyed, eager to embark on a lifelong journey together. However, our marriage unveiled challenges I had not foreseen. Joyfully accepting Edward's proposal, we became officially engaged. Visiting my parents, they emphasized the lifelong commitment marriage entails. Grace, always be there for Edward, they advised, and I readily agreed as Edward listened intently. Next, we visited Edward's parents. His father, Arthur, welcomed me warmly, remarking on the positive things he had heard about me from his son. Yet his mother, Michelle, seemed more reserved, directly asking Edward, "Is this the one?" To which he confidently responded, "Yes, Mommy, I want to marry her." I was slightly taken aback by his use of "Mommy" and Michelle's forthright manner. Quickly, Arthur intervened, saying, "Enough, Michelle. Edward has had a relatively smooth ride so far. However, he may prove to be somewhat of a challenge going forward." I responded with assurance. I adore Edward's gentle side, and I know we support each other. Arthur then turned to Edward, urging him, "Starting a family is a big deal, son. Step up and keep her happy." Edward, looking earnest, nodded in agreement. Our meeting concluded, and not long after, Edward and I celebrated our union with a low-key wedding. To our delight, my parents gifted us a condo where we embarked on our marital journey. However, it soon became evident that Edward was not accustomed to household responsibilities. One morning, while I was busy with laundry and preparing breakfast, Edward's alarm rang at 8, but he continued to sleep soundly. No matter how much I tried to wake him, he wouldn't stir. Finally, after pulling off his covers and giving him a shake, he slowly opened his eyes. "Wow, it's 8:10 already." "Why didn't you wake me up?" he complained. I reminded him, "I did try, and your alarm was blaring too. Now please eat your breakfast." As he rubbed his eyes and shuffled to the dining table, he immediately started complaining about the eggs. "Hey Grace, this egg is too runny. I can't eat this unless it's well done. Make it over," he demanded. Caught while hanging laundry, I tried to hold back my irritation and snapped, "Then don't eat it." "Why would you say that? And this coffee, it's scorching hot." "Mommy always got the eggs and coffee just right," he added. All right, I sighed, quickly redoing the eggs and letting the coffee cool. He ate hurriedly but left his plate on the table, rushing toward the restroom. "Wait up. You know you should clean up after yourself," I called out. "Gee, I'm short on time," he called back, dismissing his responsibility. Annoyed, I paused my makeup routine to clean up the dishes while picking out my outfit. He called out again, "Grace, over here. Help with my tie." There he stood, tie hanging limply around his neck, looking utterly helpless. "Seriously, you can't even tie your tie. What did you do before we got married?" I asked. "Mommy always did it," he replied sheepishly. With a deep exhale, I tied his tie, and somehow we both managed to leave the house. This had become our routine. He never helped with any housework, and it felt like I was juggling everything and babysitting him too. Every time an issue arose, it was always "Mommy did it this way," or "With Mommy it went like that," always referencing his mother, Michelle. This routine dragged on for a year, and as the pressures mounted, thoughts of divorce began to creep into my mind. My father's insistence that marriage is forever echoed in my mind, tempering my frustrations. However, an unexpected hiccup at work led to my being assigned a week-long business trip starting the next day. When I broke the news to my husband that evening, he paused his video game, clearly surprised. "Hold up, a business trip for a whole week? It's out of my hands." "Work's calling," I explained. "No way. Who's going to cover for you here for a week?" he asked, irritation seeping into his tone. "You'll have to step up. It's about time you got a grip on the household duties," I responded. At that, he sat down, his controller in hand, and locked eyes with me. Isn't the wife supposed to care for her husband and the house? Are you just bailing on that? His question dripped with outdated expectations. Seriously, that's such old-school thinking. We both have jobs. We should be a team, I countered. That's not how I see it. Mommy was always on top of things at home, he retorted. But I couldn't help but point out she was a stay-at-home mom, and honestly, it's kind of odd to hear an adult man constantly talking about Mommy. He bristled at this. "What's your deal? Taking shots at me and my mommy?" "I'm not, but let's be real. You're a mama's boy," I said. "This is how you see me? You think you can talk to me like that?" His defensiveness escalated. I had reached my limit. "Face it, you're a mama's boy. You can't get up without help, can't even tie your tie, and won't lift a finger around the house. You're constantly comparing me to your mom. For once, handle your stuff. Really, you're going to come at me like that? That's why I was iffy about marrying someone older. Should have sided with Mommy and chosen a younger, perkier girl, he shot back. His words struck a nerve, and our conversation spiraled into a major blowout. Even jokingly, "You shouldn't say stuff like that." "We're married," I said, trying to anchor the conversation to the commitment we had made to each other. The tension between us was palpable, revealing the deep rifts that had formed in our relationship. When my husband hinted at divorce during our heated argument, I was taken aback. With a smug tone, he challenged, "You can't possibly want a divorce, can you? You wouldn't want to be labeled divorced. And think about what your dad said about sticking together." But then he sharply added, "Well, I just did. If you go on this business trip and leave me here alone, I'm seriously considering a divorce." With those words, he stormed off to our bedroom, leaving me stunned. Despite the shock, the idea of divorce lingered in my mind, something I had previously struggled with as I didn't want to disappoint my parents. Yet now, it seemed like a viable option to contemplate seriously. With these heavy thoughts, I went to bed. Bright and early the next day, I was up preparing for my trip. The fallout from our argument was still fresh and weighing on me, but I had work commitments to attend to. I nudged Edward, who was still nestled under the covers. "I'm heading out. You better wake up or you'll be late for work." His response was a sleepy, unintelligible mumble. Rolling my eyes, I left. A few hours later, a text from him popped up on my phone. "You barely tried to wake me. Now I'm running late. Did you really go on that trip?" I quickly texted back, "I did wake you up. And yes, I'm on my trip. I'll be back in a week." He read my message but didn't reply. Mid-trip, I decided to call my parents to update them about Edward's behavior and share my growing inclination towards divorce. I braced myself for a lecture, unsure of how they would react to the possibility of our marriage ending. The call was going to be a difficult one, but it was necessary to seek their advice and perhaps their understanding of my situation. The response from my parents took me by surprise. "We had no idea he behaved like this. Take your time to think, but don't force yourself to stay in a situation that isn't right. Always remember, we are in your corner no matter what you decide." Their words of unconditional support brought tears to my eyes. Upon returning from my business trip, I knew a serious conversation with Edward was inevitable. If he didn't show signs of change, I was ready to consider divorce more seriously. My mind was abuzz with thoughts as I walked into our house late in the evening, only to find Edward wasn't home yet. As I looked around, a set of signed divorce papers and a note on the table caught my attention. The note read, "Since you ditched the housework, I'm heading back to my folks. Check out the divorce papers and think things over." Reading this, my initial reaction was rage. How dare he threaten me with divorce? But as my anger subsided, I began to see the situation differently. Maybe this was an indication that ending things might not be such a bad idea after all. With that realization, I decided to file the papers. When the divorce was finalized, I felt as if a heavy weight had been lifted from my shoulders. That evening, I went to bed and slept more soundly than I had in a long time. The next morning, as I enjoyed a peaceful cup of coffee, the door swung open, and in walked Edward, clearly upset. "Why didn't you come to my parents' place to apologize? What's gotten into you?" he demanded, his temper flaring. Then, noticing the empty spot where the divorce papers had been, his expression shifted from anger to shock. "Hold on, where are the divorce papers?" "Oh, I filed them," I calmly responded. "You did what?" He looked as if he had been slapped. "You went through with it." "Thanks for signing them." It made everything smoother, I said. "You can't be serious. Did you go all the way? Have you lost your mind?" He exclaimed, unable to hide his astonishment at my decisiveness. Seeing how composed I remained, he lost his cool completely. "That's it, I'm calling my parents." "Sure, knock yourself out," I replied, undisturbed by his threat, knowing I had made the right decision for myself. An hour after the confrontation with Edward, his parents, Michelle and Arthur, arrived at our apartment. Michelle immediately spotted me and dramatically exclaimed, "You. How could you just divorce Edward like that? What's your deal?" I responded coolly, "If he had the divorce papers all filled out and ready to go, doesn't that suggest he wanted out? Is that a problem?" "How can you be so bold when you're just his wife?" she countered. But before the situation could escalate further, Arthur intervened with a firm "enough." The room fell silent. Arthur turned to me. "Grace, can you walk us through what happened?" I agreed and began detailing the ongoing issues, our argument before my trip, and the divorce papers Edward had left for me. I was at my wit's end. It seemed like he wanted a divorce, so I went with it. I explained, maintaining eye contact with Arthur. After a moment of consideration, Arthur was about to speak when Edward interjected. "Mommy, Daddy, come on, can't you see she's out of line? Tell her off." Michelle quickly sided with Edward. "Oh, Edward, my poor baby. She's so hasty. You should reverse the divorce right now." "There's no reversing it. Our divorce is final. We're strangers now," I stated firmly. Michelle's face turned red, and she opened her mouth to respond. But once again, Arthur cut her off. "Zip it, Michelle." He then apologized to me for Edward's behavior. Turning to Edward, whose eyes were bulging with surprise, Arthur continued, "You bonehead. I knew you had issues, but this is next level. Using divorce papers as a threat. Unbelievable. You had it coming." Michelle tried to interject, but Arthur didn't let up. "It's partly on you, Michelle. You spoiled him. Watch out, if you keep this up, I might divorce you too." The tension in the room was palpable as Arthur confronted the reality of the situation, leaving Edward and Michelle at a loss for words. After the intense discussion, Michelle was visibly shaken, her thoughts lingering on the unexpected threat of divorce from Arthur. She murmured to herself, visibly troubled. As Arthur turned his attention back to me, his expression marked by sincere regret, he said, "Grace, I deeply regret the trouble our clueless son has caused you. It's clear he has a lot to learn. Please move on and find happiness in your life." Arthur implored with genuine concern. Thanking Arthur for his understanding, I watched as he left, taking a dejected Edward with him. It wasn't long before the news spread throughout our circle. Arthur had decided to cut financial and emotional ties with his son, a drastic step meant to push Edward towards self-sufficiency. After a while, Edward's life took a downward path. He moved into a modest and somewhat neglected apartment, marking the first time he truly lived independently. The transition was far from easy, as his new home quickly descended into chaos, mirroring the disorganization of his personal life. Faced with no one to rely on and his habitual tardiness catching up to him, Edward soon found himself without a job. Simultaneously, the dynamics within his family deteriorated further. Michelle, who had always been deeply involved in Edward's personal affairs, repeatedly crossed boundaries, leading to a serious falling out with Arthur. This ultimately resulted in their separation, with Michelle moving in with Edward, both of them struggling to find stability. They resorted to taking low-end jobs, their lives marked by a series of unfortunate events and poor choices, with no clear path to improvement. In contrast, my own life took a markedly different turn. Freed from the daily stresses and emotional drain of my relationship with Edward, I found myself alone in our condo, which now felt surprisingly spacious and full of potential. With renewed energy and focus, I dedicated myself wholeheartedly to my career. At my workplace, I experienced a flourishing professional life. Feeling emancipated and hopeful, I wholeheartedly embraced my newfound autonomy. My living environment not only felt more spacious, but transformed into a genuine haven where I could unwind and envision my future. The enhancement in my work life was tangible, and I approached each day with a sense of enthusiasm and eagerness for what the future held. The stark contrast between my thriving circumstances and the deteriorating situation of Edward and Michelle was evident. Although they were no longer a part of my life, the lessons gleaned from our shared journey profoundly resonated, reinforcing my dedication to personal growth and contentment. The first time I caught sight of Michael was during a college seminar we both attended to earn extra credits. Although our academic paths diverged, he was a business major while I focused on literature. I felt drawn to him the moment he raised his hand to pose a thought-provoking question to the professor. After the class, we happened to cross paths at the same coffee shop, and it seemed as if fate had a hand in bringing us together. We engaged in conversations that covered a wide range of topics, from our college experiences and hobbies to the memories of our childhood. Michael confided in me, saying I come from a very strict upbringing. My parents are deeply religious. In contrast, I shared, my parents are freethinkers who always encouraged me to question everything. Michael chuckled, sounds like we're from different worlds. However, despite these differences, an undeniable connection blossomed between us. We started to spend more time together, studying side by side and exploring the city on weekends. About 2 years into our relationship, we decided to take the plunge and move in together. It was a practical decision, as our previous apartments were far from the university, and sharing a living space made logical sense. By that point, we had become inseparable. Although times have evolved, my family holds traditional views on cohabitation before marriage. During a family gathering at their home, Michael's mother, Mrs. Davis, was the first to express her reservations. Michael, you're aware of our stance on living together prior to tying the knot. Feeling uneasy, Michael responded, Mom, the social norms have shifted. It's not a significant issue anymore. Mr. Davis chimed in our house it is. You're living in sin. I could feel the weight of their stares. Wanting to ease the tension, I said, we respect your beliefs, but this is our decision. We're adults. Mrs. Davis sighed. It's just not the way we raised you. Michael took my hand. Lizzie and I love each other. We want to start our life together, and I hope you can support that. The evening ended on a somber note, but Michael and I were firm in our decision. We found a cozy apartment close to campus and moved in. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and our bond grew stronger. But the strain with his parents was always in the background, like an old radio playing a sad tune. One evening, as we were settling into our new life, there was a knock on the door. It was Mrs. Davis holding a pie. I thought I'd come by and see how you two are doing, she said, looking around with a critical eye. We're doing great, Mrs. Davis, I replied, trying to be cordial. She sat down, placing the pie on the table. This is all temporary, right? You'll get married soon. Michael cleared his throat. We haven't decided that yet, Mom. As days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the constant pressure from Michael's parents started to weigh on us. Our once carefree dates and movie nights began to have a shadow, the looming expectation of marriage. One evening, while we were making dinner together in our tiny kitchen, Michael broached the subject. Lizzie, have you ever thought about, having a wedding? I looked up from chopping the vegetables, surprised. Like for us? Are you proposing? He smiled awkwardly, rubbing the back of his neck. Not exactly. I mean, yes, I want to marry you someday, but right now it's more about my parents. Maybe if we had a ceremony, they'd back off. I sighed. So you're saying a wedding without the legal paperwork? He nodded. Just a thought. We can invite friends, make it a fun day. My parents get their wedding, and we get some peace. It wasn't the romantic proposal I'd imagined, but I understood his reasoning. All right, I said slowly, but on one condition. We do it our way. No big church wedding, just something small and intimate. Michael grinned, relief evident on his face. Deal. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of preparations. We chose a beautiful outdoor venue, invited our close friends and family, and planned a simple but heartfelt ceremony. When we broke the news to his parents, their reaction was surprisingly subdued. An outdoor wedding? Mrs. Davis asked, raising an eyebrow. Well, it's unconventional, but if it means you two are taking the next step, I suppose we can support it. Mr. Davis added, as long as you're committed to each other, that's what matters. The day of the wedding was sunny and bright. I wore a simple white dress, and Michael looked dashing in his suit. Our friends cheered, and even Michael's parents seemed genuinely happy. During the reception, Mrs. Davis pulled me aside. Lizzie, I want to apologize, she began, her voice soft. I know we've been hard on you too, but seeing you together today, I realize that love is what truly matters. I smiled, touched by her words. Thank you, Mrs. Davis. That means a lot. The day ended on a high note, with everyone dancing and celebrating our love. It felt like we had finally won Michael's parents over, and I hoped this would be a fresh start for us. But as days passed, their daily visits began. They dropped by unannounced, often with unsolicited advice or thinly veiled criticisms. It was as if the wedding had given them a free pass to interfere in our lives. One evening, as Michael and I were unwinding after a long day, there was a knock at the door. Opening it, I found Mrs. Davis holding a casserole dish. Just thought I'd drop off some dinner, she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Thanks, I replied, taking the dish. But you don't have to do this. She waved a hand dismissively. It's no trouble. I just thought since you're always so busy, you might not have time to cook. I forced a smile, sensing the underlying judgment. We manage, but thanks anyway. As the door closed, I sighed deeply. Michael wrapped an arm around me. It'll be okay, he whispered. It started with the subtle comments, the not-so-innocent questions. Why is the house so messy? Or have you considered cooking something more nutritious? Mrs. Davis would ask, her tone dripping with fox concern. One day, I came home from work exhausted to find her in our living room, reorganizing our bookshelves. Mrs. Davis, what are you doing? I asked, taken aback. She looked up as if it was the most natural thing in the world. Just thought I'd help tidy up a bit. These shelves looked so cluttered. Michael entered from the kitchen holding 2 cups of tea. Mom's just helping out Lizzie, he said, trying to play mediator. I took a deep breath, my patience waning. This is our home, Michael. We didn't ask for help. Mrs. Davis pursed her lips, her eyes watering. I'm just trying to be helpful. After all, now we're family. Days like these became more frequent. They popped by without notice, giving advice we never asked for, criticizing decisions we'd made together as a couple. It was clear they no longer saw boundaries. One evening, after a particularly trying visit from his parents, Michael and I sat down for a heart-to-heart. Michael, this has to stop, I began, my voice trembling with frustration. I can't live like this, feeling like I'm constantly being judged in my own home. He ran his fingers through his hair, looking equally stressed. I know Lizzie. It's just, they're my parents. I don't know how to tell them to back off without hurting their feelings. I replied, but what about our feelings? Our peace of mind, we can't keep sacrificing that for them. A week later, we invited them over for dinner, deciding to address the issue head-on. The evening started off pleasantly enough. We chatted about work, friends, and the latest news. But as the main course was served, I took a deep breath and dove in. Mrs. Davis, Mr. Davis, we invited you over because there's something we need to discuss. I began, trying to keep my voice steady. Mr. Davis looked up, his fork pausing midair. What's the matter? I exchanged a glance with Michael, who nodded in encouragement. It's about the frequent visits and, well, the constant input on our lives. Mrs. Davis looked taken aback. We're just trying to help. Michael took over. Mom, Dad, we appreciate that you care, but it's becoming overwhelming. We need some space to live our lives, make our mistakes, and grow together. Tears formed in Mrs. Davis's eyes. After all we've done for you, this is how you repay us. Mr. Davis added, his voice stern, we're just looking out for you. It seems Lizzie here doesn't appreciate family. I felt a pang of guilt, but stood my ground. It's not about appreciation. It's about respect, respecting our boundaries and our choices. The room grew silent, the tension palpable. Mrs. Davis dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, her shoulders shaking. We just wanted to be part of your lives. I never thought it had come to this. Michael looked torn, his loyalty divided, but he held firm. Mom, we love you, but this is our life. We need you to understand that. The evening ended with Mrs. Davis in tears, Mr. Davis looking disappointed, and an unspoken agreement that things had to change. As they left, I felt a mix of relief and dread, wondering what the future held for our relationships. Days after the confrontation, the house felt unusually quiet. The constant visits had stopped, but the silence was both a relief and a curse. Every time the doorbell rang or there was a knock, my heart would race, expecting it to be Michael's parents. But it never was. One evening, as Michael and I sat on our couch, he broached the topic. Lizzie, do you think we were too harsh? I mean, they're my parents. Maybe we overreacted. I took his hand, feeling its warmth. Michael, it's not about being harsh. It's about setting boundaries. We did what we had to do. He sighed deeply. I know. It's just hard. I never imagined being in this situation with them. As days turned into weeks, we began to feel the weight of our decision. There were no more surprise visits, but there were also no calls or messages. It was as if we had cut ties completely. During this period, I often found solace in browsing property listings online. One day, as I was scrolling through, a beautiful house in a neighboring town caught my eye. It had a large garden, a spacious living area, and most importantly, it was far away from our current life. Michael, come look at this, I called out. He joined me, peering at the screen. Wow, it's beautiful. But why are you looking at houses? I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. I was thinking maybe it's time for a fresh start, somewhere new where we can create our own memories away from all this drama. He looked surprised. You mean move? Leave everything behind? I nodded. It's drastic, I know, but maybe it's what we need. We discussed it at length, weighing the pros and cons. The idea of starting anew was enticing, but also terrifying. Yet the more we talked, the more it felt right. A few weeks later, we visited the house. It was even more beautiful in person, and the neighborhood seemed perfect. After much consideration, I decided to use the money I had inherited from my grandmother to buy it. The day we signed the papers, I felt a mix of emotions, excitement for the new beginning, but also sadness for what we were leaving behind. The move went smoothly, and soon we were settling into our new home. It felt like a dream. The peace and quiet were just what we needed. One evening, as we were enjoying a quiet dinner in our new dining room, Michael said, "Lizzie, I think this was the best decision we ever made." I smiled, feeling content. I think so too. The first few months in our new home were like a dream. The mornings were quiet, filled with the chirping of birds, and the evenings brought a calm, tranquil energy. Michael and I fell into a comfortable routine, enjoying the privacy and peace that our new surroundings provided. The past seemed like a distant memory, and the attention that once surrounded our lives had all but disappeared. Until one fateful day, I was in the kitchen preparing dinner when the doorbell rang. Michael went to answer it. I heard murmurs and then a familiar voice. My heart sank. It was Mrs. Davis. I walked to the entrance, my face revealing my shock. There they were, Mrs. and Mr. Davis, suitcases in tow, standing at our doorstep. "Mom, Dad, what are you doing here?" Michael asked, his voice filled with surprise. Mrs. Davis smiled a bit too sweetly. "We missed you, dear, and we thought, why not pay a visit?" I tried to keep my composure. It's unexpected. Mr. Davis chimed in. "We just wanted to see where our son is living now." "Is that so wrong?" Michael seemed torn. "Of course not, but a heads up would have been nice." Mrs. Davis looked around, her eyes scanning our home. "Oh, what a lovely place you have here. Much nicer than the old one." I bristled but said nothing. The visit turned into a stay. One night became 2, then 3. They began to settle in, making themselves comfortable much like they had in our previous home. One evening, after dinner, I pulled Michael aside. "Michael, we can't go down this road again. We moved to escape this." He sighed. "I know, Lizzie, but they're my parents. I can't just throw them out." "Then what?" "Let them take over our lives again." Mrs. Davis, who seemed to have overheard our conversation, walked over, her eyes welling up with tears. "Is that how you feel, Michael? That we're a burden?" Michael looked helplessly at me, then back at his mother. "Mom, it's not like that. We just wish you had told us you were coming." She sniffled. "We just wanted to be close to our son. But it seems we're not welcome here either." I had a sinking feeling when I heard Michael's parents mention they'd made a decision about their living situation. The two of us had recently been discussing the matter privately, hoping to find a delicate way to address the issue. Now it seemed the matter was going to be thrust into the open. "Lizzie, Michael," Mr. Davis began, "we have some news." Michael shifted in his seat, already sensing what was coming. "Go on," he prompted. Mrs. Davis, trying to sound cheerful, said, "We've sold our house. We realize there's no need for it when we have such a lovely family home here with you too." My eyes widened in shock. "You did what?" "We wanted to be closer to you both," Mr. Davis explained, looking earnest. Mrs. Davis looked hurt. "We are family. Why wouldn't you want us here?" I took a deep breath and said what I'd wanted to say for a long time. "This house, it's mine. It's not owned jointly by Michael and me. It's in my name only." I retrieved a file from the study, showing them the ownership documents. Mrs. Davis looked at the papers and then back at me, clearly stunned. "But you're married. What's yours is Michael's and vice versa." I smiled triumphantly. "That's where you're mistaken. We held a wedding ceremony, yes, but Michael and I never legally married. We never signed any official documents, so technically, you're not my in-laws." The weight of my words seemed to hang in the air. Mrs. Davis's face turned a shade paler, her eyes widening in disbelief. Mr. Davis looked from me to Michael, seeking some form of denial. Michael took my hand, signaling his support. "It's true, Mom and Dad. We thought you'd be more accepting if we had a ceremony, but we never felt the need to get the state involved in our relationship." Mrs. Davis began to sob. "So you deceived us and now you're throwing us out." The room was heavy with tension after the bombshells were dropped. Michael's parents were clearly taken aback, but it wasn't long before the shock turned into outrage. "So you tricked everyone with a sham wedding, and you think that makes everything all right?" Mrs. Davis's voice had a hint of venom. Michael sighed. "It wasn't about tricking anyone. It was about the way we wanted to live our lives. The ceremony was for us and those who wanted to celebrate our love." Mrs. Davis's face turned a shade redder. "You dare defy the sanctity of marriage, live together in sin, and then mock us with a fake wedding. I've had enough." Mr. Davis declared, standing up suddenly, "You, young lady, are nothing but a sinner and a witch trying to pull my son away from his family and his values." I was taken aback by the fierceness of their reaction, but I wouldn't let them intimidate me. "I have not taken Michael from anyone. He's made his own choices, and it's high time you respect them." Mrs. Davis's eyes were filled with tears, but her voice was stern. "Michael, come home with us. Leave this woman. She's done nothing but pull you into her web of deceit." Michael, ever the calm in the storm, replied, "Mom, Dad, I love you both, but my place is here with her. She's been nothing but kind and understanding, even when you both haven't been. You can't just demand I leave her. You're choosing her over us." Mr. Davis's voice was a mix of anger and disbelief. "I'm choosing to live my life on my terms," Michael asserted. The room went silent for what felt like an eternity. The air was thick. Every breath was heavy. Mrs. Davis's face was a mask of hurt and betrayal. "Very well," she said, her voice cold. "But remember this. You're turning your back on your family, on your faith, all for her." "I'm not turning my back on anyone," Michael said. "I just wish you'd see that." Mrs. Davis's eyes were hard, her voice bitter. "Let's go," she said to her husband, not giving either of us another glance. With that, they left, leaving behind a wake of hurt, confusion, and uncertainty. I looked at Michael. His face was a mirror of my own feelings. We both knew that things had changed irrevocably, and there was no going back. A few days after the confrontation, as I was heading back from work, my neighbor Mrs. Carlson called out to me. She was an older lady known for her daily walks and her uncanny ability to know everyone's business. "Did you hear about the Davis family not selling their house?" she asked with a knowing look. I paused, taken aback. "What do you mean?" She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "They never put their house on the market. I heard from Susan, who heard from Janice, who works at the town's real estate office. There's no record of the Davis property being up for sale." I felt a knot form in my stomach. Were they lying to us all this time? When I got home, I shared the information with Michael. He looked shocked. "I can't believe they'd lie to us." What were they trying to achieve? We both knew the answer. They wanted to manipulate the situation to their advantage. The realization was a hard pill to swallow. All this time, while we tried to understand and accommodate them, they had been playing a game. Michael sighed deeply, rubbing his temples. "This changes things. It's one thing to have disagreements, but outright deception, that's something else entirely." "We can't keep letting them pull us into their manipulative games," I said firmly. "We need boundaries, strong ones." Michael nodded. "You're right. We can't continue like this. It's unhealthy for us and for our relationship." The next day, he went over to his parents' house. He needed to confront them and get some answers. When he returned, his face was a mix of anger and sadness. "They admitted it," he began, his voice heavy. They thought that if they moved in with us, we'd be a proper family again. They felt threatened by our independence. We sat down to discuss our next steps. It was clear that, for our own sanity and the health of our relationship, we needed distance from them. "We need a break," Michael declared. "Some time away from all this drama and manipulation." I agreed. It's the best decision for us right now. That evening, we informed his parents of our decision, which they responded to with anger and accusations. However, we stood our ground, knowing this was necessary for our own well-being and the path ahead. The following weeks were quiet as we dedicated ourselves to rebuilding the trust and intimacy that had been tested in recent times. One night, as we sat gazing at the stars on our porch, Michael turned to me and whispered, "Thank you for standing by me, for fighting for us." I squeezed his hand and replied, "Always." The journey had been long and fraught with challenges, but it had underscored the importance of boundaries, honesty, and mutual respect in any relationship. As the night deepened, we looked towards the future, hopeful for peace and understanding to come. Hi, I'm Sandra. Today, I want to share a pivotal time in my life filled with challenges, particularly with my in-laws and my husband during our divorce. I hope my experiences resonate with those of you who have faced unfair criticism from family. Let's rewind to where it all began. I met Liam, my now estranged husband, on a dating app while I was a 21-year-old college student. He was 25, grounded, and had a stable job. Despite our age difference, we fell in love. I believed that love transcends age and appearances, so Liam's older age didn't matter to me. But he struggled with it. He would often ask, "Why are you with me, Sandra? You could be with someone your age who might be a better fit." I chose him because I loved him, and to me, age was just a number. Liam's insecurities ran deep. He would persist, "There must be another reason, Sandra. It's not usual for someone like you to love someone like me. I wish you'd just tell me the real reason." I reassured him repeatedly that my feelings were genuine. I wasn't interested in dating someone my age, but I loved him, and that was what mattered to me. Despite my assurances, Liam's self-doubt lingered, hinting at deeper self-esteem issues that seemed to have kept him single before we met. To prove my genuine affection, I made sure not to let Liam spend excessively on me. While I was a college student managing my finances, I wasn't wealthy but made sure to buy him thoughtful gifts and handle my expenses. I always worked part-time jobs to ensure I wasn't financially dependent on him. Liam seemed to appreciate these efforts, but sadly, his insecurities didn't fade, and he continued to question the sincerity of my love, which deeply hurt me. It took 4 years before I fully understood the origins of Liam's issues. When I met Liam's parents, Jess and Diane, I learned more about his background. Jesse, Liam's father, won the lottery, which changed their lives a lot. This helped me understand why Liam had certain perspectives and insecurities. After winning, Jess and Diane bought a big house and invested their money wisely. However, their new wealth came with a sense of superiority. During our first meeting, Jesse often bragged, saying, "Not everyone makes it big like me." I was just a hard worker, and look where it got me. Do you realize how rare it is to win the lottery? Yet I managed it on my first try. They were proud of their decision-making skills and often implied that Liam, despite his college education, would never reach their level of financial success. Diane suggested that Liam's previous partners were only after his money and left him once they were financially better off. They openly doubted Liam's ability to make good decisions, which infuriated me. It seemed like Liam's parents saw every woman he dated as a gold digger, and over time, Liam began to believe this narrative. This insinuation that I was just another gold digger became an embarrassing and hurtful part of their story. Fed up with their baseless assumptions, I stood up for both Liam and myself. I'm sorry, but I have to disagree with you. Liam has worked hard to establish his career and will achieve even greater success in time. Jess retorted, well, that doesn't change the fact that women only want him for money. The money we have is ours, but Liam does co-own the house. Eventually, it will be his. Every time these girls see our $500,000 house, I swear they just see dollar signs. I couldn't hold back. I can't speak for Liam's past relationships, but I'm certainly not in this for the money. I love your son, and that's why we're together. I have no interest in your house. Diane then said, don't worry, Sandra. Sometimes it's hard to accept that people can be successful and live in nice houses. You live in a small rented apartment with roommates. You might start desiring it after spending time around our house too. Their comments pushed my patience to the limit, and I was on the verge of losing my temper. Liam heard everything, but chose not to respond or defend himself. Instead, he steered the conversation in a different direction. His indifferent attitude on our way home took me by surprise. After a particularly tense visit with his parents, I decided it was important to talk to Liam directly about the issue. Liam, your parents are being unfair and hurtful to both of us. Why didn't you stand up for me? Liam sighed, clearly frustrated. What did you expect me to say, Sandra? My past isn't great. I've been used before by people who only cared about my parents' wealth, making plans for when they'd inherit the house. Even if they were wrong before, that doesn't mean they're wrong about everything. I felt a pang of hurt. Just because those women were after your money doesn't mean I am. It hurt that you stayed silent while your family insulted me. Liam looked conflicted. You know my family is wealthy now, and maybe they have a point. I'm not saying you have bad intentions, but I can see why it might look questionable to others. His words were almost too much to bear. What you're suggesting is absurd, Liam. I've never pressured you to spend on me. Not having an inheritance does not make me a gold digger. Liam remained stubborn, unwilling to see my perspective. I love you, and that's what matters. Let's not argue about this anymore, he said, dismissing the need for further discussion. While some might have taken comfort in his declaration of love, I couldn't shake the feeling that he still had doubts about my intentions. As time went on, I began distancing myself from his family. We got engaged right after I graduated from college, and I landed a decent job, which allowed me to start saving for our wedding. We shared the wedding expenses equally and married when I was 25. However, the next 5 years of our marriage were rocky. Liam frequently visited his parents, each time returning more distant and upset. I knew Jess and Diane continued to poison his mind, still branding me as a gold digger. Despite my pleas for him to reduce contact with them, Liam continued to see his parents often. Their negative influence began to deeply affect his view of our relationship, convincing him that no one could truly love him for who he was. Even after years of my unwavering love, Liam's suspicion towards me never seemed to ease, and the weight of constantly having to prove my sincerity grew increasingly exhausting. However, the moment that truly tested us came on Liam's birthday. Preferring a low-key celebration, we decided to have a small cake party at our home. I was excited to make his day special. I surprised Liam with the expensive watch he had admired for a long time. He was thrilled with the gift, but my heart sank when he suggested we show it off to his parents. Despite my hesitation, I went along with him. When we arrived, Liam couldn't wait to show his new watch to his parents. Mom, Dad, look at this beautiful watch Sandra got me. I've wanted it for so long. Isn't it stunning? His enthusiasm was clear. Diane responded with a slight surprise. Oh, Liam, it seems she does love you after all. We were quite worried for some time. But Jessica quickly added, don't be fooled, Diane. She's a gold digger. She married our son because we have a $500,000 house. Let's not ignore the facts. I couldn't contain my frustration. Excuse me. Why do you think I married your son for your house? I've been working and living in an apartment for years. Besides, if age was a concern, why would I marry someone older unless I truly loved him? I assure you I didn't marry Liam for his money or your house. I married him because I love him. Surely Liam can confirm that, right? To my astonishment, Liam remained silent. His reluctance to defend me in front of his accusing parents was deeply unsettling. I felt increasingly isolated as he avoided making eye contact, sinking under their harsh assumptions. Pushed to my limit, I confronted him. Liam, why aren't you saying anything? Your parents have always labeled me a gold digger. How'll they ever see the real me if you don't speak up? Why are you so quiet? Tell them they're wrong. Liam's hesitation was palpable. He muttered, I don't know what you want me to say, Sandra. Maybe my parents aren't completely wrong. There might be a possibility that his words trailed off, but the implication was clear. This inability to stand by me was more than just a simple misunderstanding. It was a fundamental crack in the foundation of our relationship, casting a shadow over our love and my place in his life. Liam's birthday celebration quickly turned sour. I was astounded by the accusations flying my way. Are you serious right now, Liam? You believe I married you for your assets. His parents chimed in, their suspicion clear. Oddly, you've never thought about buying a house, have you? For someone renting, owning a home should be a top priority. You haven't even talked about it with him. Our place is out of your price range. You could never afford something like this on your own. So marrying Liam and settling here seems more logical. Liam looked at me with a mix of doubt and confusion. Yeah, Sandra, why would you marry me? You might have feelings for me, but I think there's more to it than just love. I was left speechless. All the love and affection I had felt for Liam seemed to disappear instantly. Both my in-laws and my husband saw me as nothing more than a gold digger. While the skepticism from his parents was hurtful, Liam's agreement cut the deepest. At that moment, I decided to end our marriage. I didn't reveal my decision right away. Instead, I waited for the right moment. Once Liam and I were back home, I contacted a lawyer and began the divorce process. The lawyer assured me that everything would be ready within a week. Meanwhile, I moved into a separate room to give myself some space. Liam thought I was just cooling off and had no idea of my intention. When the divorce papers were ready, I gathered my belongings and left. Liam, clearly distressed, called me in a panic. I told him to meet me at a specific address and to bring his parents. Despite his confusion, he complied. As they arrived, I stood waiting on the porch of a stunning house. Their expressions shifted to surprise as they took in the scene. You must be wondering why I brought you here, I said, gesturing to the luxurious surroundings. It's a beautiful house, isn't it? No one can compare their home to this one. It's worth around $5 million in today's market. Quite expensive, right? The dramatic setting was my way of showing them that their accusations and suspicions were unfounded. I was not the person they thought I was, and I needed to make that clear in the most unforgettable way. But it's worth every penny, I said, gesturing toward the lavish interior of the house, which also boasted furniture worth millions. What is this place, Sandra? I don't understand why you have access to such a house, Liam asked, puzzled. Why don't you all come in so we can talk properly? I can't explain everything standing here on the porch, I suggested, brushing off their astonishment as I led them inside. They followed, their eyes widening in awe at the opulent decor. As we settled into the plush sofas, I took a deep breath, ready to address the elephant in the room. I've made a decision, and that's why we're here. I filed for divorce, I stated, handing over the papers. We can proceed with an uncontested divorce if you agree. What? I don't understand. Why are you filing for divorce? Liam's voice was a mix of confusion and concern. It's simple, I replied, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside me. You and your parents think I'm a gold digger. You believe I married you for your house and money. Despite everything I've said, you've refused to listen. So it's better for everyone if I leave, sparing you from what you deem my gold-digging tendencies. You're considering divorce just because my parents spoke what they believe to be the truth. That's ridiculous. Liam retorted, disbelief coloring his tone. I think it's for the best, I replied, firm in my resolve. His mother, watching the exchange with an unreadable expression, chimed in, If she's so adamant, you should just sign the papers, Liam. Then at least you can find someone who truly loves you. Why did you bring us to this house, Sandra? Do you expect me to buy this for you as part of our divorce settlement? Liam asked, suspicion in his voice. Why would I need you to buy this house, Liam? This house is already mine. I answered calmly, watching their shock and disbelief unfold. They looked at me as if I were joking. How on earth can you afford a house like this? You're renting, and your job isn't enough to cover something like this. Stop lying to us. Liam's father demanded, his tone sharp with suspicion. Their disbelief was palpable, but I was ready to prove my independence and financial capability once and for all. I'm not lying, I asserted firmly. Liam, remember when I mentioned that my parents left me some inheritance? Well, this house is part of it. It's under a trust for now, but I will officially inherit it when I turn 32. I don't need to work a high-paying job because I have a trust fund waiting for me. That's impossible, Liam interjected. Your parents passed away a long time ago. They should have given you the house earlier. My parents were aware of the potential leeches I might attract, I explained. So they instructed me never to disclose the house or the trust fund to anyone. They wanted to keep everything safe until I turned 32. By then, they hoped I would be settled with someone who genuinely cared about me, not my inheritance. Oh my God, Sandra, you should have told us about your wealth. We had no idea. This is a sizable house you have. We could all live very comfortably here, Liam's mother exclaimed. Yeah, you should have shared that sooner. We thought you were after our house. We could have avoided all the misunderstandings, Liam added, looking relieved yet somewhat embarrassed. I always knew Sandra was perfect for Liam, his father chimed in, his tone shifting dramatically. I've been saying she's a great woman. Look how wealthy she is. Liam found a great match. Hearing this, I couldn't help but laugh. Their attitude toward me had changed so quickly, it made my head spin. What was even more bizarre was that they seemed to forget about the divorce papers I had brought. Pulling out the papers, I signed them. As I was saying, here's my signature for an uncontested divorce. You can just sign these to make it easy. If you want to fight, we can take this to court, but I won't live with you anymore. Wait, Sandra, listen to me. There's no need to rush this, Liam pleaded. You've already proven you're not a gold digger. There's no reason to get a divorce anymore. We even apologize for any misunderstanding. That should make things better, right? Yes, Jesse is right. We're sorry, Sandra. We doubted you for no reason, his mother added, her voice filled with regret. Despite their apologies and sudden change of heart, the memory of their judgments and accusations lingered in my mind. I couldn't stay in a relationship where trust had to be proven rather than given. "I don't want your insincere apologies," I said firmly, my resolve unwavering. "For 4 years, you allowed your family to berate me and call me a gold digger. I expected you to defend me, but instead, you sided with them and even accused me of the same. I can't stay with someone who doesn't respect his wife. I'm done, Liam. We can part ways amicably or involve the courts. The choice is yours." Diane and Jesse tried desperately to change my mind, pleading with me to overlook the past. To them, what had happened was just a minor misunderstanding. However, their lack of genuine remorse for tarnishing my reputation only fueled my anger. When I reached my breaking point, I demanded that they leave before I called the police. My firm stance intimidated them, and they left without further argument. Over the next few weeks, Liam and his parents continued to harass me. They begged, pleaded, and even offered bribes to persuade me to stay. Their belief that money could sway my decision only intensified my fury. It was a stark reminder that they still saw me as someone motivated by financial gain. Ironically, since Liam co-owned the house with his parents, I was entitled to half of his share, which only fueled their desperation for reconciliation. Despite their relentless attempts, I stayed firm in my decision to leave. I moved all my belongings to my parents' house, asserting my right to stay there even before officially taking ownership. Liam and his parents kept trying to reach out, so I changed my phone number to avoid their constant calls from unknown numbers. Liam even tried to discuss matters at my workplace, but I had informed security beforehand, and they asked him to leave. Liam still hadn't signed the divorce papers, holding out hope that I would change my mind. Nearly a year has passed, and the situation remains unresolved, showing how complex and emotional our lives had become. With less than a year left until the divorce is finalized, I've managed quite well on my own, living independently. I found both happiness and financial stability. While I've gone on a few dates, I'm not considering anything serious at the moment. According to a cousin of Liam, his family is now worried about having to pay me my rightful share of the house. The legal fees are mounting, and their savings are proving to be insufficient. Liam is even advocating for selling the house, harboring resentment toward his parents for the chaos they've caused in his life. At this point, I simply don't care about their problems. My only goal is to be free from that toxic family and move on with my life, leaving the chaos and negativity behind. My parents welcomed me back with open arms, providing the support and comfort I needed during this difficult time. They were surprised by the turn of events but understood my decision. Moving back home allowed me to reconnect with old friends and focus on rebuilding my life. I found a new job that I enjoy, and my colleagues have become a second family to me. Liam and his parents didn't give up easily. They continued to send letters and emails, pleading for reconciliation. I ignored their attempts, knowing that engaging with them would only prolong the emotional turmoil. It was clear to me that they were more concerned about their financial situation than genuinely apologizing for their behavior. During this time, I focused on self-improvement and personal growth. I enrolled in a few online courses to enhance my skills and took up new hobbies to keep myself busy. I also started therapy to help process my emotions and ensure I was making the best decisions for my future. My therapist helped me see that walking away from a toxic relationship was the right choice, and I began to feel more confident in my decision. As the divorce process dragged on, I made sure to document everything. I kept detailed records of all communications and interactions with Liam and his family. This meticulous approach proved helpful as my lawyer navigated the legal complexities of the case. It also gave me a sense of control over a situation that had felt so overwhelming. Despite their relentless attempts to win me back, I stood my ground. I knew that returning to Liam would mean subjecting myself to more years of distrust and manipulation. I deserved better than that, and I was determined to create a life free from their influence. Liam's cousin kept me updated on their financial struggles. The mounting legal fees and the prospect of losing the house were taking a toll on them. I felt a sense of vindication knowing that they were facing the consequences of their actions. However, I also knew that my happiness didn't depend on their suffering. I was focused on my own journey and the positive changes I was making in my life. Eventually, Liam agreed to sign the divorce papers. The relief I felt was immense. It marked the end of a painful chapter and the beginning of a new one. With the legal process finally moving forward, I could see a clear path to freedom and peace. In the end, I emerged stronger and more resilient. The experience taught me valuable lessons about self-worth and the importance of standing up for myself. I learned that it's better to be alone than in a relationship where I'm not valued or respected. Moving forward, I promised myself to never settle for anything less than I deserved. Leaving Liam and his family was the best decision I ever made. It gave me the chance to reclaim my life and build a future on my own terms. No longer was I defined by their opinions or accusations. I was finally free to be myself and chase my dreams without the burden of their judgment. Looking back, I have no regrets. The journey was challenging, but it strengthened me in ways I never expected. I found happiness and fulfillment on my own, proving to myself that I didn't need anyone else's approval to lead a meaningful life. I'm Brenda, and I found myself perched at the top of the stairs, hidden from view. Down in the kitchen, Mom and Frank were in a heated exchange that felt as tangled as old shoelaces, full of frustration. Frank had barged into our lives like a bargain bin superhero, lacking the charm and the flair. Frank, she's my daughter. I heard Mom say, her voice shaky, almost like it was trying to sneak around him. Look, Sheila, I didn't sign up for this. He shot back, his irritation filling the air. Dealing with this messy place and your cooking is bad enough. I've got my own kid on the way, and that's where my focus needs to be, not on this. Mom's tone shifted, quiet but fierce. This? What do you really mean? Frank scoffed. Not this leech you've got hanging around. She's just a burden, someone I don't even know. She needs to go. Mom exhaled long and sorrowful, like the air itself was heavy with regret. But where would she go? I felt like my heart was a punching bag, and Frank was the kind of guy who didn't know when to stop swinging. What about her aunt, that sister of what's his name, the dead guy? Linda. But no buts, Sheila. Geez, you're always so soft. She's family, ain't she? Let her deal with the kid. There was a quiet beep as someone pressed a number on the phone, and my ears strained to hear the rest. Yeah, hi, Linda. Frank here. Yeah, you're about to do me a solid. Got a bit of a situation. Well, no, not a health thing. It's about the kid, Sheila's daughter. I squeezed my eyes shut, wishing I could just disappear into the worn carpet beneath me. Yes, Brenda. Frank's voice was gruff and impatient. Look, here's the deal. She's coming to live with you. What? Nah, don't worry about it. She's practically invisible anyway. Won't even know she's there. I heard Mom's shuffling feet, like she was pacing or fidgeting, probably wringing her hands the way she did when she was torn up about something. Linda, it's Sheila. Yes, I know. We're in a tight spot. I can't with the baby coming. The next voice, Aunt Linda's, cut through the line, sharp and cold like the knives she used to make her overcooked roasts. Fine, I'll take her. But I'm not running a charity here, Sheila. You better keep sending checks. I could almost see Mom wincing even from where I sat. It's done knowing the rest of my things in that duffel bag weren't half as important as those checks to Aunt Linda. Footsteps hammered towards the stairs, and I scampered up and into my room, heartbeat thundering so hard in my chest it nearly drowned out the sounds of the looming goodbye. Mom knocked softly, as if the force of her own hand could shatter me. "Honey," she started, pushing the door open, her face all twisted in a way that let you know I'm sorry was coming before a word left her lips. "You're going to stay with Aunt Linda for a bit." I stood there, my arms tied around that duffel bag like it was the only thing I had left in the whole sorry world, because maybe it was. With a glance back at the room that had been mine, I stepped out into the dim hallway, Mom trailing behind me like a shadow I wished I could shake. I didn't even turn to look at her as I walked out the front door. It was easier that way. Standing on the porch, Aunt Linda looked me up and down as I clutched my duffel bag, each second stretching out like hours. "So you're here, Brenda," she finally spoke, the words flat and hard. "Hi, Aunt Linda," I managed to mutter, trying to keep my voice steady. "Don't just stand there. Bring your stuff in. But remember, I run a tight ship. You'll follow my rules under my roof," she said, turning on her heel and heading inside. I followed her into the house, which had the warmth of an ice cube. Rule 1, no shoes in the house. Park them by the door and don't you dare drag in any dirt. I keep a clean home. I nodded, slipping off my sneakers and leaving them neatly by the entrance. Rule 2, lights up by 9 on school nights. I won't have any late-night gallivanting or nonsense. She continued, ticking off her rules on her fingers as she went. "Okay," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Rule 3, don't talk back. Don't question me. Just do as you're told, quick and without fuss. Her house was like a museum, everything in its place and nothing out of line. The living room looked barely lived in. Plastic covers clung to the sofas, and I bet my last dollar they'd never been sat on. Aunt Linda caught my gaze and snapped. "Those are for protection, not for sitting." God help you if I catch a crease in them. I just nodded again, trying to take it all in. A few days in, and it felt like I was walking on eggshells that were rigged to explode. I spent my time trying to be invisible, hoping that it would save me from her sharp tongue. One day, I slipped up. I spilled a bit of milk on the counter. Quick as I could, I wiped it up, but not quick enough. "What's this?" A puddle. Aunt Linda had appeared like a whisper, and her voice was like thunder. "Wasting food and making a mess." "I got it, Aunt Linda. It's clean now." I showed her the rag, trying to prove it was just a small spill. "You think sorry and a rag fixes everything. You think I have the time and money to waste on your clumsiness." "No." I started, but she cut me off with a wave of her hand, like I needed more problems. "Your mom sends you here like I've got nothing better to do," she grumbled. "Even your own mom didn't want you, so why should I?" Her words hit me square in the chest. I stood there, jaw tight, swallowing the hurt, because crying wouldn't change a thing. I knew arguing would only make it worse. The rules were clear, and Aunt Linda was the kind who never bent them, not for anyone. "Sorry won't happen again," was all I could get out. "You're right, it won't. Because if something like this happens again, we're going to have a bigger problem. You hear me loud and clear." I answered. My voice sounded small, even to my own ears. Dinner was a silent affair. Aunt Linda liked eating without the sound of anyone else's breathing, it seemed. I tried to chew quietly, making every move deliberate, wishing I could just disappear into my room already. Days bled into weeks and weeks into months. each as unremarkable as the last. Until one afternoon, I was sitting on the carpet in my room, the one with the faded wallpaper peeling at the corners. My room in Aunt Linda's was just another box in the stack, nothing like my old one back at Mom's. With Aunt Linda at the grocery store, I grabbed the cordless phone from its cradle in the living room. My heart was racing as I punched in Mom's number, a sequence I still knew by heart, years of dialing it for takeout or when there was a spider too big for me to handle alone. The phone rang and rang. On the fourth, she picked up. "Yeah?" "Mom, it's me." "Brenda," I blurted out before my courage could fail. There was a pause, a breath, a sigh. "What do you want?" I miss you." "I don't," she cut in, her voice icy. "Don't ever call here again." The line clicked dead. I stood there, phone in hand, her words a new weight in the pit of my stomach. It wasn't just the rejection that stung, it was the finality of it. "I hope that was important." Aunt Linda's voice came from behind me like a winter's draft. I turned, startled, the phone slipping slightly from my grasp. "I just wanted to talk to her," I said, my voice failing to hide the quiver. She snatched the phone from my hand, her eyes narrow slits. "You think these calls are free?" "I'm sorry, I'll pay for it," I stammered, though I had no idea how. Aunt Linda snorted. "Pay for it with what?" "No, you've caused enough trouble. I'm done with it, done with you." Before I could plead, she was on the phone, barking into the receiver. "Yeah, Betty, get her room ready. She's coming to you." I barely had time to process her words before I found myself holding a bus ticket and a hastily repacked duffel bag. She dumped me at the bus stop with a shake of her head and a good riddance that followed me onto the bus. I was on my way to Grandma's, and as the bus chugged along, the town I knew became a blur. I thought about Mom's voice, that tone I'd never heard before. I pressed my forehead against the cool window, the hum of the engine a stark contrast to the storm inside me. Grandma lived in a smaller town a couple of hours away, in a house that was old but twice as cozy as Aunt Linda's. She was standing on the porch when I arrived, her eyebrows drawn down in concern. "You okay, Brenda?" she asked as I trudged up the steps. I shook my head. "Aunt Linda sent me away. Mom doesn't want to talk to me anymore." Grandma sighed, opening her arms wide. I stepped into her hug like it was a safe haven. "Families can be tough," she murmured. "Come on in. I'll make you some tea." As I sank down at her kitchen table, surrounded by the comforting scent of cinnamon and apples, the warmth of the room unfreezing my fingers, I started to realize something hard. Sometimes the idea of a parent isn't what you get. And maybe, just maybe, I had to start figuring out how to deal with that. The day I settled into Grandma's house, I could tell it was a different world. The walls were aligned with pictures of plants and landscapes, unlike the museums back at Aunt Linda's place. Grandma was already in the kitchen, the heart of her home, humming a tune I didn't recognize. "Gran, you need help with anything?" I called out as I dragged my bag inside. Without missing a beat in her humming, she replied, "Just park yourself at the table. I'm going to fix us some grub." Her voice was raspy from years of yelling over the noise of farm machinery back when she used to run the family's apple orchard. Now the most noise she dealt with was the creaking of the porch swing and the clatter of her old pots and pans. As the weeks passed, I fell into step with her ways. Wake up before the sun, help with breakfast, then off to school. After school, help around the house, dinner, homework, and bed. No frills, no drama. One chilly afternoon, Grandma found me on the porch swing, the horizon painted orange and pink by the setting sun. "Got something to tell you," she said, pulling the other side of the swing down with her weight. I tightened my grip on the chains of the swing. Whatever it was, Grandma wasn't one for beating around the bush. You're not just staying here, you know. This isn't temporary, she said, holding out some papers to me. I've gone and made it official. You're mine now for good. I scanned the papers. Words like custody and guardianship jumped out at me. Why'd you do this, Gran? To me, it seemed like taking on a burden or trouble that a teenage girl was worth. 'Cause your blood, kid. More than that. You got spirit, she said, remembering tenderness beneath the strength. She repeated her old saying and tapped her chest. Right here is where you've got to be toughest. We sat quiet for a while, the swing creaking under us as the sky darkened. I let her words wrap around me like the quilts on my new bed upstairs. Thanks, Gran, I finally said. That was all. Thanks. It sounded lame even to my own ears. Well, don't thank me yet. You'll be pulling extra weeds tomorrow. Make no mistake. Her tone was playful, but I knew she'd hold me to it. Sitting on the swing now, a few days after my sweet 16, I could see that Grandma's house wasn't just a haven. It was a starting line. With her backing, I was finally ready to run my race. The morning sun hadn't even cracked the sky when Grandma kicked the bottom of my bed. Rise and shine, Doc, she barked, same as she had every morning since I started med school. I groaned, my hand searching for the alarm clock. It's not even light out. Gran, the world doesn't wait for light. Cows don't milk themselves. Patients don't cure themselves either. She didn't have cows to milk, of course. It was about getting a point across, like always. Afternoons at the hospital were a blur of white walls and beeping monitors. By the time I got back, evening had settled in and the house glowed with warm light. How'd it go? Grandma was at the stove, poking at something that smelled like heaven. Good, real good. I washed my hands at the kitchen sink, watching her move around the kitchen. Dr. Clean let me lead a minor procedure. She raised her eyebrows, a spoon still in her hand, dripping some sauce. Is that right? And how'd that feel? Scary as hell, I admitted, but I did it. And it went well. That's 'cause you're made of stuff, she said as she plated the food and set it on the small kitchen table. Earned your stripes today, huh? Feels like it, I agreed, diving into dinner. Afterward, we sat on the porch, me with a textbook, her with her knitting. The night was quiet, the only sound the crickets and the occasional turn of a page or click of needles. Thinking of Ted, she asked out of the blue. Ted was the first boy I'd brought home, a lifetime ago it seemed. Not much time for that. I didn't even glance up from my book. Relationships took time and energy I didn't have. You make time for what's important, she countered. There's more to life than just work and study. I sighed, maybe after my residency, Gran. She nodded, knowing that was the best I could offer right then. Just remember, life's short. I smiled at her words, thinking how many times I'd heard just that. Never forget, you got more to give than just being a good doctor. Got a heart that needs sharing too. It was in this simple way that she kept my feet on the ground, reminding me there was a world outside medicine. And one day, I'd be a part of that too. We didn't talk much after that. The night wrapped around us, a blanket of peace as I pondered a future that seemed both exciting and terrifying. As the clock ticked towards tomorrow, I knew one thing for sure. Whatever the future held, I'd face it head-on, just like Grandma taught me. I should have known when Gran missed breakfast for the third day straight. It's nothing, she said, waving off my concern. But nothing didn't leave you pale and worn out. Nothing didn't whisper lies in a voice that trembled like an old barn in a storm. The news hit like a brick. It's cancer, the doctor told me, flat like the EKG I wished was for someone else. Anyone else. You serious? I asked, darting from the doctor to Gran, who sat there nodding like she'd known all along. As serious as it gets, Gran said. She sat up straight, no tears, just that squared chin that always meant business. The battle was short and fierce, and through it all, she'd never let me see her scared. Until one quiet morning when she finally let go of the fight, the breath slipping from her in a soft sigh, like she was slipping into a warm bath. After, the house felt empty, like someone had scooped out the middle and left me with a shell. I walked through the funeral like someone else, shaking hands, accepting hugs, hearing murmurs of, "She loved you like her own." They didn't get it, not really. It wasn't like she was my own. She was my everything. After everyone had gone, I stayed back, leaning on the cool marble, staring at the casket that was too new, too shiny. Left alone, I whispered to Gran like I used to when it was just me and her against the world. "I'll make you proud." I swear. The next morning, I found myself at the hospital, the hall sterile and smelling of disinfectant. My hands were steady, my mind clear. This was where I belonged. I might have lost Gran, but I was going to save others, keep going, just like she would have wanted. In surgery, my hands didn't shake. Strength lived in me. Each stitch was a promise, a testament to her legacy. A legacy of love that didn't end with last breaths or in silent funeral halls. It was the love that pushed you forward when life kicked you in the teeth. The love that made you square your shoulders and face each day, knowing you were never really alone. Mom always had a flair for drama, like she could smell money from miles away and come sprinting. The doorbell rang one lazy Sunday, pulling me away from medical journals and a cup of coffee. I opened the door, and there they were, like some twisted version of a family reunion photo. Mom looked at me with those hawkish eyes, and before I could even get out a hello, she was in with the ask. "You've got to share. It's only fair. Half is ours by rights," she said, her hand fluttering around like a bird trying to get out of a cage. Stepdad just leaned in the doorway, arms crossed, a muscle ticking in his jaw. He had that look, the one he got when he knew Mom had a great idea. Sarah hung back, not saying a word, just scrolling on her phone. I couldn't help it. A laugh just bubbled up. "Oh, you for what exactly?" "Last time I checked, you kicked me out when I was 11. Mom's eyes narrowed to slits. "We put a roof over your head, fed you, clothed you. That has to be worth something." Fed and clothed. More like rations and hand-me-downs. I crossed my arms, mirroring my stepdad. I was not going to be bullied, but Gran. She said the word, almost a slur. "She left you everything, and we're struggling here." Stepdad took a step forward. "Listen, just give us what we deserve, and we can all walk away from this peacefully." I shook my head, a mix of anger and disbelief churning in my gut. Gran didn't leave you a penny because she knew exactly what sort of people you are. Matter of fact, you remember that whole thing when I was a kid about where I came from. Well, it turns out Gran adopted me when I was a baby, so legally I'm not even obligated to give you the time of day, let alone any inheritance. Mom went pale as a sheet, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. "No." Sarah looked up then, her face confused. "What's she saying, Mom?" Stepdad's face transformed into a dark cloud. "She's saying we're not getting a damn thing." "That's right," I affirmed. "You won't get anything from me. You'll regret this." Stepdad growled, a vein bulging in his neck. I stepped out, bracing myself against the frame of the door. The morning sun was hot on my back. "Is that a threat?" I asked, my voice steelier than I felt. He squared his shoulders, but I wasn't 11 and scared anymore. "It's a promise." Mom grabbed his arm, giving me a look that could curdle milk. "Let's go," she hissed. I stepped back inside and closed the door. The click of the latch was loud in the quiet house. Gran was gone, but she left me more than money. She left me the courage to stand up to them and the sense of worth they tried to take from me. Neighbors gave me the heads up with a quick call. Just thought you should know, they rang. That sort of trouble your mom and her lot set up camp in your grandma's old house. They said, all concerned and a bit gossip-hungry. That house was mine and mine alone. Grandma made sure of that. The nerve of them thinking they could just move in and not one soul would tell me. Guys, I said, knocking on the door louder than necessary. You can't just crash here. This isn't a motel. Mom yanked the door open, a fake smile plastered on her face. Brenda, we're family, she exclaimed, leaning against the doorframe like she owned the place. Stepdad loomed behind her, his look less welcoming. We're not going anywhere. This is as much ours as it is yours, he stated with that smug smirk that made my blood heat up. I clenched my fists, feeling the weight of the keys in my pocket. The house is mine. Legally, you have 1 day to get out, or I'm calling the cops. They laughed, the kind that grates on your nerves. Yeah, sure, call the cops on your family. That'll look great, Stepdad jeered, his arms folded across his chest. I didn't want a scene, but they left me no choice. The next morning, they were still there, lounging around as if they owned the place. That's when I made the call. When the cops rolled up, I could almost taste the sour change in the air. I stood by, arms crossed, watching through the living room window. Ma'am, sir, you need to leave the premises now, one officer said firmly, his hand resting near his belt. But she's my daughter, Mom tried to plead, her voice shifting to desperation. And I'm her stepdad, added stepdad, that taken his jaw back like a storm warning. Doesn't matter. You don't own this house, and the owner wants you out. The second cop chimed in, stepping forward. They finally stopped laughing. I could see the realization dawning on their faces, the reality that they couldn't bully their way through life anymore. I didn't budge until their car was a speck in the distance, and then I turned to face the empty house. It felt like taking a deep breath after being underwater too long. It was quiet, the kind of peace that comes when a storm has passed and left clear skies in its wake. Stepping into the house, the air felt different, lighter. Grandma's voice didn't echo the way it did before. Now it was in my own head, words that came like a balm, soothing over years of scars. With each step, I began to reclaim the spaces that meant so much. The kitchen where Grandma taught me how to bake, the living room where she mended my teenage heart itches with ice cream and her wise words, and her bedroom where she prayed for me to find my way in a harsh world. I brewed some coffee, and the rich aroma wrapped around me, tying me to this house and this moment. Sitting at the kitchen table, I lifted my cup to greet the new day. Justice served, and it felt good.